Trusting others is often quite rational. If we have a common interest, for example, I can expect you to secure my interest because it's also yours. In a well-made contract, I may have made myself vulnerable to betrayal, but I haven't risked much. If I can tell whether you could prep my trust, I can reward you for compliance or punish you for non-compliance. And because you know that, you have reason to keep my trust, independent of whether you care for my interests. Trust really comes in only if I think you will give my interests some consideration, whether or not it matters your interests. So trust, this attitude, makes most sense in the context of an ongoing relationship. If the relationship is rich enough, it will be impossible to keep track of all the costs and the benefits, let alone to sum them. As a result, in normal human relationships, the default response to being trusted is to look after the other's interests without calculating the costs and benefits for oneself. That's how trust works among private individuals. But we're here to talk about politics and about the public significance of trust. It's not obvious when one first thinks about it why trust should matter for politics. Thomas Hobbes, writing in the mid-17th century, thought politics began with the creation of the Leviathan, his state, which was a device for people who thought they had no reason to trust one another. His sovereign is there, in effect, to distribute rewards and punishments for respecting each other's legitimate interests, precisely because often we cannot rationally entrust things to one another in the absence of the state. Thomas Jefferson used the word confidence to discuss what we call trust, and concluded that in questions of power, then, let no more be said of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. That thought is Hobbes's. What makes the Constitution work is that we are fearfully suspicious of one another. Jefferson thought that if the institutions were rightly designed, it would be in the interest of each of us to do our part. We could be entrusted with our social roles, but we wouldn't really need to be trusted. Indeed, the whole Madisonian theory of the American founding could be seen as an exercise in the design of institutions created for people who do not trust one another. But this makes representative government a little bit mysterious. When we elect members of parliament, congressmen or presidents, why should we think that they will have at heart the interests that matter to us? There are millions of us with our own bundles of interests, some shared, some consistent but distinct, some conflicting. How could it be reasonable for all of us to trust in this context? Well, an honest and well-informed free press whose members have a vocation to cover what is relevant and to explain it, to uncover the hidden that should not be hidden, to be guided not by partisanship, by evidence, political parties that bear the costs of breaking their promises and discipline their members in order to maintain a reputation for reliability, a political culture that respects the principle that even if one can take advantage of the vulnerabilities of one's fellow citizens, one should not. These are the sorts of things that can make it reasonable to entrust the government to others. The grounding of what is sometimes called vertical trust, the citizens' trust in institutions, need not, in fact, be trust in any person. We just need, again, as Jefferson argued, to structure the institutions so that this vertical entrustment is reasonable. But the running of the state and of interstate relations involves dense networks of relationships among officials. These are interpersonal relations of exactly the sort I started by talking about. How does Brussels or the World Trade Organization or the G7 or NATO or a school of other international military and economic arrangements and institutions actually work? Why are they enabled by private institutions like the World Economic Forum? Because the officials who work in this world make up a sort of international political society, staffed with diplomats and military officers and civil servants and business people who regularly interact with their counterparts from other countries. These are the career internationalists. They can prevent tensions from turning into conflicts and conflicts from turning into wars. They defuse and de-escalate. They bargain and compromise. They bank trust and sometimes spend trust. And their interactions are too dense to be managed by a simple calculation of interest. Of course, it's part of their profession to represent, to acknowledge and understand interests, and to know how to rank them. But in building trust with one another, one by one, they create a web of interpersonal trust that the states and other institutions they serve rely on. And rightly or wrongly, many citizens of our democracies see evidence of horizontal trust among elites as grounds for wondering whether it is reasonable to have vertical trust for those elites. Trust within the elites, the coziness of officials meeting in front of the cameras, generates skepticism among citizens about whether they should entrust them with anything. And the reason they've lost their faith in the capacity of elites to deliver what is entrusted to them is not that they think they know better than elites do what policies are in their interests. It's rather that they have seen that the existing policies have not brought them what they hoped for, and so they have lost confidence that the elites can be trusted with their interests. In many places, there are many people who don't believe what the government or the press tells them. In others, many doubt that the elites have the competence to deliver even when they want to. And in yet others, they think that the elites' trust in one another has turned them into a class that pursues its own interests, indifferent to the interests of those below them in that vertical relationship. They may suspect, too, in an age of large corporations and hyperaccumulation, that political elites are being bought off by the financial elites. Skepticism about elite competence isn't surprising, but the corrosion of faith in institutions cannot simply be pinned on the failure of elites. It's at least as much the result of the circulation of nonsensical paranoid narratives, especially through the new digital media. Russian disinformation, it has often been observed, works not because we believe it, but because it engenders a more generalized distrust, such that any news can be dismissed as fake news, even the truth. The so-called information wars are, in the end, wars against information. Their efforts to undermine the authority of fact, and trust is their intended victim. Despite the populist resurgences, despite the crises of authority in terms of belief, we continue to benefit from great reservoirs of social capital that make our social civil spaces work. People make themselves vulnerable to one another in small ways all the time in daily transactions, without needing to calculate the interests that guide other people. These experiences give us no reason to believe that other people are normally untrustworthy, even the strangers we meet on the street every day. Still, citizens do not need to understand a political fact to notice it, and the willingness to trust their affairs to existing elites is surely only rational when those elites appear to be competent and aimed at the ends with which they have been entrusted. And so I wonder if the answer to the decline of trust, especially the vertical trust towards political elites, isn't simple enough. Elites need to work harder to earn back popular trust, telling the truth more often, even when it is uncomfortable and complex, being more honest about each other, rejecting the unreasonable demands of rich individuals and institutions, and creating structures that are reasonably transparent and effective in policing the behavior of officials. The people have often been sold the wrong solutions, but they are typically right in their awareness of the problems. On that, the elites can trust the people.